to have served in this office is to have felt a very personal sense of kinship with each and every American. In leaving it, I do so with this prayer. May God's grace be with you in all the days ahead.
And so, Richard Milhouse Nixon has resigned as the 37th President of the United States, effective at noon tomorrow, when Gerald Ford, the Vice President, will be sworn in as the 38th President of the United States. It was a 16-minute speech in which the President seemed calm but controlling, obviously, very deep emotions. He did not, I think my colleagues will agree, confess any crimes in regard to the Watergate or any other matters. He said that he was guilty perhaps of some bad judgment, but that was all. Eric?
Yes, there've been no further admissions. Perhaps it was foolish for people on the Hill and some of us to think that there might have been. He has said, in effect, he is not resigning because of a sense of guilt, of any criminality, but because his political base has eroded in the Congress, and he could not be effective even if he went on through the long periods of impeachment and trial in the Senate. And therefore, it's best to cut this thing short in the interest of the whole country. On the whole, it seemed to me as effective, as magnanimous a speech as Mr. Nixon has ever made. And I suppose there'll be many, even among his critics, who will say that perhaps that few things in his presidency became him as much as his manner of leaving the presidency. Certainly no attacks on his enemies, not on the press, as we did have from Vice President Agnew a year ago when he resigned. I think people will find it very hard to fault this. A man is certainly entitled to call attention with his last words as president to what he considers his positive acts, which are those of trying to make peace in this world. Obviously, that is how he wishes to be remembered. And perhaps that will be the positive side of his record, even for many years to come, I think.
It certainly was a conciliatory speech. He even paid tribute to those who have been in opposition to him, which hasn't always been the case with President Nixon's speeches, and said he was sure that their interests in the country were the same as his, but they approached the problem from different viewpoints. Dan Rather, our White House correspondent, Roger Mudd, our Capitol Hill correspondent, are with us also, along with Eric, in the studio here in Washington. Gentlemen, your reactions for tonight's speech.
Walter, I think it may very well go down when history takes a look at it as one of Richard Nixon's, if not his finest hour. Needs to be made clear and can't be reemphasized too often, I think, as I think the President made clear in his speech. There is no joy in this for anyone tonight. No decent thinking American could take any joy out of this. That sadness is tempered by, for many, with awe for the constitutional process, what we sometimes call the system, which worked magnificently. It was that constitutional process. It was a process of law which brought us to this moment. The President in his speech made clear that he respects that, he understands that, he has that appreciation and that awe for it. He did give, and I would agree with Walter, what you said, he gave to this moment a touch of class, more than that, a touch of majesty, touching that nerve in most people that says to their brain, we revere the presidency, we respect the president, the republic, and the country comes first. Roger?
Well, just from a purely congressional point of view, I really wouldn't think that was a very satisfactory speech. It did not deal with the realities of why he was leaving. There was no accounting in the speech of how he got there and why he was leaving that Oval Room. That whole question of Watergate is all that anybody in the Congress has had on their minds for the better part of a year. Half the Congress has defended him. Half the Congress has gone out on a limb for him. In the absence of any explanation or any acknowledgement of the president's responsibility in the Watergate cover-up, the viewer is left to conclude that it was simply some craven politicians in the Congress who collapsed in their defense of the president, and solely because of that was he having to leave the presidency. I think that it was, from the congressional standpoint, realistic to think that the president would make some bow toward the Hill to accept the blame that he admitted last week was his. But there was nothing like that tonight, and I think that the Congress will not be in any sort of mood to even consider for a brief time a grant of immunity, even though it's not legally binding and really would have no effect. And I think in the absence of any congressional action on immunity, Special Prosecutor Leon Jaworski will read that as a mandate to go ahead and proceed against the president in the courts of law.
Roger, what about the other aspect of the thing? Do you think that there will be calls on Capitol Hill now to go ahead with the impeachment process in order to convict the president, or at least lay out the evidence against the president for the people again in their Congress?
No, I don't, Walter. I think that the middle ground has been arrived at on the Hill. I think that that most congressmen now want it over. They want it behind them, and they have settled in their own minds no more impeachment, no further need to push the machinery of impeachment, but at the same time, no immunity. And that is the compromise they've reached. That puts the Congress in the position of not being vindictive, because you're not kicking a wounded man. But it also means that they are not permitting Richard Nixon to get beyond the reach of the law.
It might even be suggested that he was appealing for the Congress and prosecutors, wherever they may be, to let the matter now lie, inasmuch as he said that the first essential was now to bind up the wounds, and he wished to do so by taking this action, laying the gauntlet down to the others to also take similar actions so that the wounds will not be opened again.
Well, there is still to be accounted for in the country, it seems to me, a sizable body of opinion that would rightfully ask, is the President of the United States really to be beyond the law? That if certain crimes were committed and certain laws were violated, then somebody ought to be punished for them. Now, an awful lot of men have had their families broken up in the last year because of crimes that they have committed. They've said in the name of national security or whatever. The president said tonight that any, I think, mistakes of actions, some actions were wrong, he said, but those actions were in the best interests of the nation. But nonetheless, there's been an awful lot of sadness delivered on a lot of Washington families. Now, those people were not beyond the law. I think the release of the transcript of the June 23rd, 72 tape means probably that Bob Haldeman will go to jail, and that John Ehrlichman might well go to jail. And I think there must be some accounting for those Americans who asked after the Agnew case, why didn't Vice President Agnew go to jail? The only answer in the Agnew case is that the Vice President specified to certain criminal acts. He agreed to that statement, and that was the key point in the Justice Department negotiation in the Agnew case, that before they would absolve Mr. Agnew from federal prosecution, he would agree that he had violated the law. Now, in this case, there's been none of that.
Well, this will be weighed. This is going to be the agony of the next few days, if not weeks and months. The agony of weighing what you have said on the one hand, Roger, in the Congress and in the hearts and minds of the American people, weighing that against, on the other hand, the lack of appetite to more than that, the absolute determination, I think, on the part of most people, not to shoot at lifeboats. That here you have tragedies, human tragedies, in the whole wake of this mess over the past few years, and the whole sordid affair. You've had one human tragedy after another. And the question is, is there any real desire to add another to that? It is not an easy question. I don't mean to suggest that the answer is obvious tonight. I think it isn't. It is something that is going to require a great deal of thought, something unquestionably a lot of people are going to ponder. The point about is there equal justice under the law, which you have described, is the central question. There were any number of people, in fairness, I would say myself, after the case of the vice president, who said, how can you reconcile a young woman in her teens in Tennessee getting jail time for stealing a can of hairspray from a Woolworth-type store and then letting the vice president of the United States off? There was and is that argument, but I may be wrong. But my own assessment is I don't think that the American people, nor the Congress in the end, will want to pursue Richard Nixon if it can possibly be avoided.
Eric, we have absolutely no precedent, of course, for what has occurred tonight. Never before has this happened in our history. But how would you look upon the chances of this conciliation that the president seemed to be requesting?
Well, you can only hope, and I don't think it's for any of us to say whether or not he should be prosecuted or whether or not the Congress should go ahead with, at least on the House side, with an impeachment process. And I don't know whether they're going to. I do not believe that Special Prosecutor Jaworski will prosecute the president or not prosecute him on the basis of what he said or did not say tonight. I would think that would depend on a great many other factors, including the possible surfacing of new evidence of a damaging kind, if that should happen. The whole tone of this speech tonight, and it's appealing directly, of course, to the people, not just to congressmen, prosecutors, I think would make it much harder for congressmen or prosecutors to be rough about this with Mr. Nixon, because they are subject to the backlash of popular feeling, and I think he's appealed to that tonight. And I don't know how one passes judgment about because other people have been convicted, he must be tried. I'm not Solomon, and I don't think any of us are. I think we just have to wait now to see what the sense is on the Hill and the prosecutor's office.
That public opinion will be important, as it always is, in the affairs of a democracy, and perhaps we've had a little sampling of it tonight right out in front of the White House itself, where a crowd was gathered in Lafayette Park, and Bob Schieffer is with them. Bob?
Walter, I suppose we have 1,500 or 2,000 people outside the White House on the Pennsylvania Avenue side, and then across the street over here in Lafayette Park, where we are situated. I must tell you that I'm a bit surprised that this is as good-spirited a crowd as it is. It's really a mixed bag. There are all sorts of people here carrying all sorts of signs for and against all sorts of things. Many of them gathered around the TV positions here while the president was speaking, and were able to hear the president speak on the television monitors we have here. In general, it was a well-behaved group. There were really only 3 outbursts of emotion about 5 minutes into the speech, when the president said he was not a quitter. There was some laughter in the crowd here. And then a few minutes later, when the president announced that he would definitely resign, a great cheer went up from the people here. And then after the speech, people here applauded. They were not exactly what you would call cheers, but just applause. And then after that, the people began pouring across the street and across Pennsylvania Avenue up to the gates of the White House. For just a few minutes or so, the traffic on Pennsylvania Avenue was blocked. So all in all, I'm surprised at just how good-humored this crowd was. It has been well behaved.
Should be here out. The president announced that his resignation will be effective as of noon tomorrow, and at that time, Vice President Ford will take the oath of office. We have been advised earlier that that oath would be taken in the Rose Garden, adjoining the White House Oval Office, and that before the Vice President takes the oath of office, President Nixon will have left the White House with his family, his 2 daughters and their husbands, and Mrs. Nixon, and will fly to San Clemente, California. Whether he will be there in time to hear Vice President Nixon swearing in or not, it seems highly doubtful.